Hey guys, Coach Chad here, and this week on the Quantum Leap Body Transformation Program, we are talking about our nutritional workbook, and we are diving into the concept of writing a meal plan. Okay, now primarily what we're talking about is writing a day-to-day meal plan, which then could be utilized across the week and months, and expanded past that. Now, of course, you guys have already done some of this work, not necessarily directly towards the meal plan writing itself, but you guys have been tracking your food. You've been doing all of your content. You've got your nutritional audit completed, so you know your numbers that you're supposed to be hitting and the numbers that you're moving towards. So that's all good. Now what we're going to do is we're simply going to be reviewing that and spending some time digging into understanding if there's any ways that you can optimize it. Okay, so we have 6 basic steps to writing a meal plan that we're going to quickly go through here, but your task is going to be to go to the workbook and do the work that's required on the side of meal preparation. So let's start with our first step inside of writing an appropriate meal plan, which is scheduling your meals. Now, this came up in a question a few weeks ago. So we've already addressed this a little bit, but let's just dig into it one more time. With regard to scheduling your meals, there truly isn't a right or a wrong way to do this. But what I think you want to do is you want to spread your nutritional load or your nutritional density across the day as much as you can, working with a basic of maybe about 3 to 4 meals per day. I think traditionally that's going to be the standard one for a lot of people. But in the past, we've always heard things like you have to have 6 evenly spaced meals a day, eat every 2 to 3 hours. These things are just simply not true. They're not required. And then also there's a big push right now to people be moving into like things like intermittent fasting. So only eating maybe a 4 to an 8 hour block. And I think all of these methods of eating are acceptable. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. Where you should be making the choices is based on your schedule and your lifestyle and how you prepare your food. Okay. So it's got to make life easy. Okay. It's got to make your meal preparation has to make your nutritional choices easier and simpler to adhere to. That's the whole goal here, is to make it work for you. That's why this is considered flexible dieting, not only just in the way that we set up the macros when we do the work, but also in the way that we apply it in the way that you eat throughout the day. Okay. Now, I think there is something to be said for schedule, that you actually want to adhere to a certain basic schedule throughout the week. That just makes creating habits easier. Having said that, there's a lot of variability here. So as an example, I'll use myself and the way I do some of my meal prep. Throughout the week, my days seem very, very static. Okay. And that's mostly based around the fact that my work schedule is very static, as is my family schedule with the kids going to school, Claire working, all these different things. So it makes it easier to have a basic meal plan and strategy and schedule there. But then on the weekends, if I'm at home throughout the weekend, I often work on the weekends, but if I'm at home, I find it very challenging because the kids are constantly eating. There's always things going on. Food's readily available. Whereas if I'm at work or behind my desk, I'm just doing my stuff, not really thinking about food. But on the weekend, if I don't actively have things to be working on, I can find myself looking in the fridge frequently. So what I do on the weekends is I intermittent fast throughout the mornings and I offload my caloric content to the evenings. And the reason I do that is because we have family dinners every weekend. That's our time to get together, because traditionally I work in the evenings and we don't see each other. So on the weekends, we try and find some time to do family dinners on Saturday and Sunday night. So I offload a lot of my nutritional content to the evening so I can have a larger meal with the family and I can still fit it into the macros that I want to adhere to. So that's one example of how maybe you can modify your week to make it fit your needs. Okay. That's my example. So you guys have to spend some time to go through this. So when you're doing this, you're going to go through and make your meal schedule. Now I only have the one example here on the page where you take the time of day and then your meals, and all you're doing is laying out are your meals, snacks, full meals, whatever you want to call them. Just lay them out and just take time to consider them. But on that note, I think it would be best to also think about the week as a whole. Are there any challenges that you have on certain days based on your work schedule or days off work or family stuff, whatever it might be, doesn't matter. Just consider how your week goes together and how you would put your meals together. So this documentation, this workbook this week is simply for you to take some time and analyze those things. That's all it's for. Okay. So scheduling your meals. And if you have some specific questions around how you can best schedule your meals, then that can be asked in your weekly questions. Okay. So step 2 in the meal writing or meal writing a meal plan, sorry, is to prioritize protein. Now we've discussed this almost every single week. Is that we have to have appropriate levels of protein in our diet, especially when we're in a caloric deficit for weight loss, because we want to maintain satiation or at least have a high level of satiation, and we want to minimize the amount of lean muscle tissue loss because of the deficit and the weight loss. Okay, so what we want you to do is we want you to take some time to analyze, to reflect, and to think about what your meal choices are for protein and how, when you put them together, does it look throughout the day to get your levels of protein in. So you can take your meals. I have on the line here 1 through 7 meals, which most likely you will not be using that many meals. And again, I'm talking about a meal being anytime that you're eating food, not necessarily just snacks or large meals. And the basic rules that you want to plan out here is that every meal should have a source of protein. That's rule number one with protein. Secondarily, we should be somewhere between 20 and 50 grams of protein. But realistically, it's ideal if you can spread that out across the day or across your meals as best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you have some protein per meal and that you're not just shifting all protein to one meal or none on a whole bunch of others. Okay. Again, this is one of the problems I found when I played around with intermittent fasting, is that I end up with a very large level of protein in 1 or 2 meals, because my traditional day is somewhere between 230 and 250 grams of protein. So to put that in 2 meals, well, that's a lot. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why offloading and having more meals throughout the day is beneficial, because you can spread the caloric content out and you can make it a little bit more palatable. Second one is that you, of course, choose your protein sources. I wrote in your document, anything that ran, swam, or flew are your best choices. That's a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a little bit comical, but again, we're talking about whole food protein sources, unless you're making other choices around vegetarianism, veganism, whatever it might be, for either moral or health reasons. It doesn't really matter, but whatever your reasons are, try and stick to as much whole protein sources as possible. If you're not choosing whole protein sources and you're using other ones from the vegetarian side of things, then you want to make sure that you have a balance of your protein so that you have a full amino acid profile. But again, that's something that you want to ask your coaches about if you are walking down that path. Then the next step, the fourth rule of protein, was consider limiting fatty sources of protein to about 1 serving a day at tops. And again, this is mostly because of the caloric content that's going to come with fattier choices of protein, and it's going to offload your food density and your caloric load too much, that it might make it really hard to stay satiated throughout the day. So we do prefer leaner choices of meat, but that's not from a health perspective. That is solely from a caloric load perspective and a food volume perspective. Okay. The fifth rule, and we've already discussed this previously, it was a question as well, is try limiting your protein supplementation, either through bars, powders, or any other variation of BCAAs, things like that, to no more than 20 to 25% of your total protein count. So simply take your total protein goal, mine being, let's just for simplification, 250 grams. I can have 25% of that, which then of course would be 62.5 grams at 25% per day can come from protein supplementation and bars. So that might mean a scoop and a half of protein post-workout and 1 protein bar. Something like that would be topping out my supplementation needs for protein, not using whole food sources. Okay. So your task is simply to write down some of your choices and how the proteins fit throughout the day and what it looks like. Okay. So you're just going to try and find that balance. All right. The next step is then to move into planning your fat content. So planning your fat content, the real only rule here is that we want to ensure that you're getting a nice variety of fats. So we're getting the PUFAs, the MUFAs, then the saturated fatty acids, that we're not focusing on only one. Okay. And I think from a basic health perspective, there's a lot of research, a lot of data around fat content, whether it be saturated fat, good, bad, ugly, increased cholesterol, whatever it might be. Our basic principle here is, rather than getting into the nitty gritty and the details and making tracking food nearly impossible and more unfriendly than it already is to just simply have a blend of fatty acids throughout your diet. So what we've asked you to do is take your top choices of fat content that you use in your daily meal preparation and list them out. What are the top sources of fat that you use? So it could be steaks. Obviously, in a steak, you're going to have high fat content. It might be some of your dressings, oils, eggs, whatever it might be, cheeses. please put them down and then just check off the predominant source of the fatty acid that's in that food choice and see how your top choices come out. Do you have a blend? Do you have a mixture? Or are they all saturated fatty acids, right? From animal products or whatever there might be. So just simply take some awareness. And then what we're going to do at the end is you're going to sit down and you're going to look at that and go, are there places that I can make some changes? So rather than maybe having butter on certain things or using things like that, if you already have a lot of fatty acids from animal products, maybe incorporating some nuts might be of value to you. Rather than using certain types of oils, maybe you want to use a different type of oil. So again, moving from a canola oil to a coconut oil or to an olive oil or some variation of. All right, so you guys got some homework to do on that one, a little bit of research to do to make sure that you have your numbers correct, or sorry, not your numbers, but that you have your sources correct. And it's a fun little workbook task to do to see where things are actually at, because most of the time we don't take time to look into that. Step 4 of 6 is to plan your carbohydrate content. Now, remember, fats and carbohydrates, we don't have a nutritional goal on, meaning we don't have a macronutrient percentage or gram that we're trying to adhere to. They just make up the remainder of the calories once we have our protein goal set and our caloric goal set. So carbohydrates and fats can be mixed relative to your preference in eating. We've discussed this many, many times, but we now get to dive into a little bit more with regard to how to best choose your carbohydrate sources. So I have 5 basic principles or maybe just guidelines that you should be following in your meal preparation for ideal outcomes. First rule: add non-starchy vegetables to every single meal. So again, we're talking about the broccolis, the Brussels sprouts, the spinaches, the lettuce, you know what they are, all the non-starchy vegetables. They should make up about half of your plate. So if you visualize my head as a plate, half of it is the non-starchy vegetables. Okay, so as much as you can. Now, there may be some meals that don't fit that. So as an example, breakfast with eggs is challenging. So you just put lots of veggies in your eggs to make an omelet, right? If you're having a bagel in the morning, you could put layers of spinach and a tomato and onions and different things like that to make a sandwich or some variation of. Okay, so the whole idea is to continue adding as many non-starchy vegetables as possible throughout the day, because one, they're very, very low in caloric load. They're very high in nutrient density. They're very high in food volume relative to the caloric load, so they make them more satiating. And there's just so many nutritional benefits from these foods, from the vitamins and minerals and the phytonutrients that comes with them. Okay. Second rule is to add 1 to 2 servings of fruit per day. I suppose that could be 1 to 3. You have to make it fit your macronutrient profile. So I probably have 3 to 4 servings, but I'm also taking in 3,000 plus calories sometimes. Okay, so I have probably the room to do it. And of course, by doing this, you are going to be adding a lot more, depending on the food source that you're eating. You add a little bit of hydration in the foods that you're picking. You also have a very high fiber content. And again, that micronutrient level is going to be the highest in some of these fruits and vegetables, which will be a little bit different than your non-starchy vegetables, which will give you a good complement of micronutrients. Okay, so a lot of health benefits, of course, to fruit. And I wouldn't limit what fruits you're taking, but I would stay away from things like dried fruits. You're going to be eating those whole foods that we always recommend. Third point: once you solidify your non-starchy vegetables and your fruit content, then you can make up the remainder of your carbohydrates from starchy vegetables and or grains. Okay, so now this is getting into the oatmeals, breads, pastas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, somewhat turnips, things like that. That will make up the remainder of your carbohydrate level. Now, remember, of course, we don't have a goal. So what is the remainder of the level that you have? It's based on your eating style, okay, your preference. Now, there's a few ways you can do this. So I have wrote in here that essentially you could time your carbohydrates, your starchy carbohydrates and your grains whenever you want. Some people put them throughout the day and they just have a little bit in every single meal. That's totally fine. Some people like to put them later in the day because traditionally this is something I know on the weekend, this is something we do a lot, because for family dinners with the kids, we got to feed 4 kids. It's a lot. And we usually use things like pastas and rices and breads and different variations with those meals. And that's where we're going to have a lot more time to prepare. So that's always something you have to consider, is the time to prepare some of these foods. And then also just how it fits in the day. So then the weekends it's offloaded. But now for some people, they actually find it offloaded to the morning is easier. So things like bagels and oatmeal become breakfast choices for many. So grains and that could be shifted up to the morning. That's fine. And I guess my point is I'm trying to make is it doesn't really matter where you put them. There is another way, which if you're doing a lot of workouts, I think is really beneficial from a standpoint of recoverability from workouts and optimization of glycogen levels in the human body when you're working out and recovery, is to offload all your starchy carbohydrates and grains to post workout. Now, I'm not talking right after your workout, but the next meal after your workout. All right. So you could be having the rices, the pastas, the breads, different variations of that, or potatoes. You know, I used to use a rice pudding, different things like that in post-workout meals. So then you could offload your high starch, high carbohydrate content foods post-workout. And that works really great for a lot of people. So you have a lot of flexibility here, guys. Okay. But your guys' job here now on your workbook is to simply take what are your top carb sources. So I have, again, 13 different ones here. You don't have to use 13, but what are the main carbohydrate sources that you ingest on a regular basis? What are the grams per serving? So you guys can mess around with this a little bit. You just have to flip through your MyFitnessPal and see where your last things are. And then start to write out and check box in the workbook. Was that an NSV, a non-starchy vegetable, an SV, a starchy vegetable, a G, a grain, or a other, or a fruit, right? So you could add all that in there. And then you start to realize, hey, wait a second, I should only have 1 to 3 fruits. I have 7. I should have mostly non-starchy vegetables in every meal. So every meal should have a lot of those, but you'll note you don't have any. So again, it's just a time for you to reflect and pay attention to what you're currently doing and how it looks when you actually see it on paper. Okay. So that's your step 4. Step 5 is to then add your drinks and your condiments. Now we discussed this last time a little bit, but again, as a review, you can never hear this stuff too much. Basic fluid intake: glass of water upon rising, a glass of water before every meal, and then 1 to 2 liters of water based on your ability to drink throughout the day. So if you just filled up a shaker of water or a 2-liter bottle of water and carried that around with you, your job is to drink that by the end of the day. If you adhere to those basic principles, trust me, you're going to get your hydration levels looked after properly, and there's no need for anything beyond that. When you work out, have a glass of water before, have some water during, and have a glass of water after, which might be part of your pre-workout and your post-workout protein. I will count those. Those are still considered hydration. So those will all fall under appropriate fluid content. The next one was part of fluid is obviously caffeine, because we're thinking coffee and teas and different things like that. And the basic rule here, use the lowest, what do I call it, minimum effective dose, okay? I think we drink too much coffee sometimes. I'm going to get shot for that statement, but use the minimal effective dose from a standpoint of having optimal energy and optimal sleep function and habits. Next is we talked this last time. I don't want to get too deep into this, but you're not required to eliminate diet sodas or the flavorings and those kinds of things. I truly believe that's more of that's a you thing. That's a personal choice you want to make. But from a research perspective, there's no difference in utilizing those for weight loss. So if that's what can help you stay on board, that's great. If some of the flavorings and things cause issues with sweetness triggers and different things like that, you may have to modify. But that's something you can do on your own time, but don't feel guilty for adding them in. I brought this up last time. There's probably one of these on the side of my desk at almost all times. Okay. Then the last one was limit your alcohol content. So we discussed this briefly last time as well, but the rule I put on here was no more than 2 to 3 times per week. Enjoy alcohol if you are a person who enjoys alcohol content, and then make it no more than 10% of your daily caloric load. That's probably the highest I would recommend when trying to lose weight. I think it's best maybe if you or to avoid alcohol, to be honest. But if it's something you need in your diet and it's a stress reliever or whatever it might be, just try and minimize the dose of it while you're going through. Okay. So that finishes up the fluid side of things. Condiment wise, essentially it's just like utilizing all kinds of herbs, spices, all that kind of stuff are fine. Just be aware that some are going to have a lot of sodium content if you're using like things like some steak sauces and things can have that, and as well as sugar content if you're using any other things. So stick to mostly the herbs and spices and you'll be fine. Okay. And then the final step on here is final adjustments. And this simply where you're going to just analyze based on your MyFitnessPal. So you have two ways to do this. And I think I should use, it's not two ways. I would recommend you do both of these. Go to your MyFitnessPal and just simply review the last week. Are you within 50 calories every day of your goal and 10 grams of your protein goal every day? That's what you're shooting for. 50 plus or minus calories every day, 10 grams plus or minus on the protein every single day. Okay. And then obviously you just have your outline basic rules around carbohydrates and fat content. So fat content was 2 to 7 fatty sources per week in the proteins you're choosing, and then also ensure that you're having a fatty fish 2 to 3 times a week, and if not, then maybe supplementation with a fish oil would be recommended. And then carbohydrates, really just to review again, every plate non-starchy vegetables, followed by fruit, followed by starchy vegetables and grains throughout the day. So that would be where we would start there. Okay. Now, your next step is then to actually just do a little bit of a homework task and write out an example day. So I have, I think, 5 meals here. So if you have to add more, you go ahead, but I think most of you will fit within that. I have a 5 meal plan. You're going to add the food group. The food group is then just, is it a protein? Is it a starchy vegetable? Is it a fruit? What is it, right? Where are you getting these sources from? Okay. Is it a fatty fat? If you want to write what kind of fat, you're welcome to do that. That's fine. And then the actual food is just what is the food and the amount of the food you're having. And then I guess the next one is the serving size. So how much? So you're going to write out a day. You can do this on paper so that you can kind of make some notes and play around and check around with it. Or you can just utilize your MyFitnessPal, okay, which you've already been doing and you should still be doing, of course, as part of this program. But what I want you to do is, and that's why I'm a paper pen guy. Like I just have paper everywhere. I'm always writing notes and making lists and all that kind of stuff. So to me, workbooks are really valuable. So write it on the workbook if you need. And then you have a couple questions to ask yourself. What did you learn about your current method of eating? And how can you adopt changes to make it closer to the guidelines that we laid out? So in the chapter I wrote, what are 3 to 5 potential changes that you can make to optimize your meal planning for better progress? That's something you guys have to figure out. So you guys need to go through your workbook, go through your food logs and analyze how you have been putting together a day and how things have been going for you. And that is our next step. Okay. So I wish you guys luck in this, have some fun with this one. And I'm intrigued to see what kind of stuff you guys come up with. All right. You guys have a great week. I appreciate it. And we'll see you soon. Stay cool, team.